Okay, Dr. Gant, we are live and recording.
Thank you, Kevin. Good evening. My name is Monica Gant, and I'm the Associate Secretary of the Academic Support Team for the Delaware Department of Education. And I have the pleasure of welcoming you to our
Dr. Gant, we are live and recording.
fourth Delaware COVID-19 academic.
My name is Monica Gant, and I'm the Associate Secretary of the Academic Support Team for the Delaware Department of Education. And I have
Sorry about that. We had two speakers going there. I have the pleasure of welcoming you to our fourth Delaware COVID-19 Academics and Equity Working Group meeting. This June 24th, 2020 meeting is being called to order at 5:00 p.m. This meeting is being held electronically. On March 12, 2020, Governor Carney issued a declaration of a state of emergency for the state of Delaware due to a public health threat. The state of emergency allows all public meetings of executive branch public bodies, including the Delaware COVID-19 Education Working Group meetings, to be conducted electronically, either by means of telephone conference call or video conference call. The information regarding this meeting, including information on how to access the meeting electronically, was published on June 16, 2020, and posted on the state public meeting calendar site. The presentation slides are also posted. Individuals may participate in this meeting via the DDOE YouTube channel publicized on the agenda
and posted on the state public meeting calendar site.
Each week, public comment is compiled from the previous week and posted online. A copy is also provided to the work group chairs to then share overall themes related to responses that may impact the work at hand. We encourage working group members to review these comments online before each meeting. In this week's public comments, concerns about the challenges of remote learning as well as concerns about returning to in-person instruction were raised. Some wondered and made suggestions about how schools might configure instructional time in a hybrid environment. Educator of 18 years and parent of a 9 and 7-year-old, Tia Live Joseph, proposed that school day be split in half to accommodate smaller groups of students attending at different times of day, granting all students access to core curriculum and in-person learning. Recognizing the hardship that alternating schedules could cause working families, finding options that address the public health guidance while providing equitable learning environments for students and manageable considerations for families is important. As a reminder, our workgroup meetings are public meetings to provide transparency and the opportunity for the public to engage in the process. In order to enable every participant to have voice, public comment will be accepted via email at reopeningideas@doe.k12.de.us or voicemail at 302-735-4244. All comments and ideas will be forwarded to the respective workgroups for review and posted on Delaware Department of Education's website as well at www.doe.k12.de.us/PAGE/4211. Our meeting structure will begin with an opening, which will include a summary of public comments, parking lot, purpose, goal, and agreements, a review of essential actions draft by scenario, and concluding with next steps. Our norm for engaging in our online meeting is that we begin with muted microphones and, if possible, video camera on so that we can visually confirm clarity and sound. When we would like to participate, we raise our hand. At that time, Kevin will call on us, and then we will lower our hand when we begin to speak. Our schedule of work will lead to recommendations to the Secretary of Education through the lens of educational equity within 3 public health scenarios. To support our efforts, we used our first 3 work sessions to gain common understanding of equity, assessment, and instruction, and identified key considerations to be considered in a minimal spread, minimal to moderate spread, and significant spread scenario. This evening, our key considerations have been captured in essential actions that you were asked to review prior to tonight's meeting. Based on your feedback this evening, we will use our final meeting to review final recommendations. I'd now like to give each workgroup committee member the opportunity to introduce themselves and their role. Kevin Lamb, our technology host, will now call on members by name to introduce themselves. Please remain muted to control feedback until your name is called.
Ms. Castellanos, I've taken you off mute.
Thank you. My name is Allison Castellanos. I am an English as a second language teacher at Delaware Technical and Community College. I'm representing English language learners and families and teachers in Delaware, and I live in Georgetown. Thank you.
Senator Pettyjohn, I've taken you off mute.
Thanks, Kevin. Senator Brian Pettyjohn, represent the Georgetown area here in Georgetown, along with Allison. Been in the Senate since 2012 and have been member of the Education Committee up until this year. But very involved in education issues within our state. I have a daughter who is going into 11th grade now, so very interested in making sure that our education system is world class here in Delaware. Thank you.
Okay, I don't see Representative Shoup on. Ms. Thomas, you're.
I'm Caitlin Thomas. I am the Delaware Educators Rising 2020 president, and I'm here as a student representative from the Smyrna School District.
Cricket, I've taken you off mute.
Thanks, Kevin. Hi, I'm Cricket Hines, and I'm an education consultant with Opportunity Labs.
Okay, Mr. Young, I've taken you off mute.
Hello? Hello?
Mr. Young.
Okay, I'm sorry. Good afternoon. Eugene Young with the Metropolitan Wilmington Urban League. I was stuck trying to make it home in time, so you're catching me live from the car, but thankful very much to be here. Look forward to the meeting.
Thanks for joining us.
Ms. Haar, I've taken you off mute.
Hi, Gwendolyn Haar. I'm an English language arts teacher at Dover High School in Capital School District.
And it looks like Representative, have you off mute? Okay. Representative Williams, are you there? Okay, we'll go to Ms. Schneider.
I'm here. I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, Representative
I was
Williams.
having connection issues.
Please go ahead. We're doing introductions.
Oh, hi, Kim Williams, State Representative from the 19th District, Vice Chair of the House Education Committee. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Sorry for being late.
Ms. Schneider, you're off mute.
Hi, Laura Schneider. I'm a principal in Seaford School District. I'm representing principals throughout the state and implementers of remote learning.
Dr. Lawson.
Good afternoon, or good evening, should I say. Lisa Lawson. I serve as the Executive Director of Special Education and Student Support Services for the Brandywine School District.
Hi, Loretta Gregg, parent representative from Lake Forest School District.
Alonzo, I've taken.
Hi, good evening, Dr. Maria Alonso, a psychologist, board president of Academia Antonio Alonso Charter School.
You're off mute.
I'm Matt Burrows, Superintendent of Athletic School District.
Ms. Vitelli.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Vitelli. I'm a special education preschool teacher at the Colonial Early Education Program in Newcastle, Delaware, and I'm the 2020 Delaware Teacher of the Year.
Ms. Ingram, you're off mute.
Hello, I'm Stephanie Ingram. I'm a fourth grade teacher, and I am the president of the Delaware State Education Association.
Oh, my turn? I didn't hear my prompt. Sorry. Good evening, everyone. Tizzy Lockman. I'm the state senator in Delaware's 3rd District, Greater Wilmington area. I serve as vice chair of the Senate Education Committee and a co-chair of the Reading Consortium for Educational Equity. So equity is something I care deeply about, seeing us make positive strides towards in our educational system, and look forward to this as one part of that work. So thanks. Looking forward to today's meeting.
Thank you all. Really appreciative that you all were able to join us. I know that there are many things going on and there's many places that you could be, so we're really appreciative that you have been a part of this work. As mentioned in our previous meetings, the contribution of every member of our work group is valuable and critical to the recommendations that the Academic and Equity Work Group generates. As a result, please honor our work group agreements to engage fully, remain focused on our goal, be mindful of other members, every voice is important, solutions focused, assume good intentions. It is a responsibility of the co-chairs to hold all members of our work group to these agreements. To honor your time and contribution, we will reference the agreements when needed to ensure that we are positioned to fulfill our charge and provide our recommendations to the Secretary of Education. It's important to restate that our charge is to provide recommendations through the lens of the educational equity within 3 public health scenarios. We are not charged with determining whether school buildings are open or closed, nor are we charged with creating requirements for remote learning. Through our common understanding that we have developed during each meeting, we will provide feedback in response to key considerations for equity, assessment, and instruction when we start school, either in person, remotely, or a combination of both, which we often refer to as hybrid. This feedback will inform our final recommendations. So last week in our parking lot, there were quite a few items that are actually captured in our, scroll down a little bit here, that are actually captured in our essential actions. And so there is an opportunity to see some of that language in our document. Specifically time for educators to collaborate, importance of professional learning, and communication of guidelines and expectations in the remote learning environment. So to prepare us for our review of the essential actions document, let's briefly review our common understanding to provide context. So we begin with the foundation of educational equity as our goal. We understand that assessment is much bigger than one test. It is the ongoing process of gathering information about student learning to inform education-related decisions. Instead of learning loss, which focuses on student deficits, we view unfinished learning as a prerequisite knowledge or skills that students need for future work that they don't have yet. So our action will be to provide consistent access to grade level content because students experiencing unfinished learning benefit most from grade level instruction. Equity plus assessment plus instruction equal accelerated student learning and grade level curriculum using prioritized assessment that directly informs instruction. So I'd like to now ask our co-chair, Mr. Ashley Giska, to use the Notice and Wonder protocol that we shared with you to walk us through a review of our essential actions draft within the public health framework. So this is going to be the bulk of our meeting this evening, and it is going to take us some time to walk through. So Mr. Giska, I'm going to turn it over to you, please.
Thank you, Dr. Gant. Welcome, everybody. Good to be back with you as well. It's been nice to see this process unfold, all the great dialogue, the important items put into the parking lot for consideration. So what we have tonight here to review is our essential actions. These were sent out to everyone. I'm hoping you had an opportunity to review, but there'll be some time to see what's up on the screen as well. We're going to go through a Notice and Wonders protocol as we move through these slides. There'll be an opportunity, as our normal protocol, to point out anything that you notice about the essential actions that are displayed, or anything that you wonder or that we might need to consider as we keep moving forward in this process. The essential actions as they are written will go to inform almost directly our recommendations. So if there are things that pop up to you or that you've considered while reviewing them in preparation for tonight's meeting, there'll be an opportunity to speak and talk about that during this session. I'll just remind you that as we go through each slide, if you would like to talk about something you notice or something you wonder on that particular area that has come up for you, please put your hand up in the participants column as we've been doing all along. And Kevin will have take over and make sure that you get an opportunity to speak on that particular slide. So without any further ado, we are going to start off. We have our 3 scenarios we talked about. And the first scenario, of course, would be a minimal spread scenario. So before school buildings open, here are some essential actions that we're going to review. Can we move to the next slide? So we see here essential actions number 1 and number 2. Take a moment if you need to review these, but now would be the time if there's anything you notice or wonder about these particular essential actions to put your hand up. I'll wait for a few moments and let Kevin jump in.
Okay, we have a hand from Senator Lockman.
Yes, I guess the one thing that popped up for me, I was just looking at the way things were worded in 1D. I know that's one we talked a lot about in previous meetings. It talks about assigning non-teaching staff. I guess I know we've talked a lot about capacity, so I wasn't sure if maybe it should be worded in such a way, you know, rather than work with what you got, that maybe leaning a little bit more into ensuring, you know, that you're fully at the greatest capacity that one could be to ensure that those types of things are accomplished. I just thought assigning maybe was a little weak. I don't know if that occurred to anyone else.
Okay. All right. And we are, Cricket is taking notes on these particular items, and that's a good point. That's something that we've talked about, Senator Lockman, in the hopes that we're able to bolster people's ability and capacity. So it's a point that's been well versed. So thank you for bringing that back up. Excellent.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a hand from Dr. Lawson. Dr. Lawson, I've taken you off mute.
So I would just piggyback on what Tizzy just remarked about. I think it's going to be more than non-teaching staff that have to address the SEL pieces for students. I think teachers are going to have to do that too. We absolutely do not have enough of those non-teaching staff to address all the needs that will be there. So I would just add on that I think it's going to take a collective group, including teachers, to do this.
Excellent point and well put as well. Something that we certainly realize and will need to represent in our recommendations. Thank you. Kevin,
I'd also like to bring to our attention that the number 1 is really about that whole working group coming together. So it's going to be composed of a broad group of stakeholders. So they would be able to identify if there are other folks that need to be a part of that conversation. So that's going to be really important, as well as making sure that as teams are pulling those work groups together, those return to instruction and learning work groups together, that they include members that will be able to help them with that.
Okay, next we're going to Ms. Ingram. I have taken you off mute.
Thanks. I think when we're talking about number 1, if we could, in all of the recommendations, change the word teachers to educators to make it more inclusive, especially when we're talking about gathering feedback. When we think about teachers, we only think about folks in the classroom, but we have those CISPs who are those non-teaching staff members that we just spoke about that also need to be included in the process. So I think if we take the word teachers or replace with educators, it's much more inclusive.
Thank you. Great point, Ms. Ingram.
Yeah.
Kevin?
Okay, I do not see any additional hands at this time.
Okay. We're going to go ahead and move to the next slide. We'll take a look at our minimal spread, number 3 and 4. Let's move on. When we're ready, we'll go ahead and move to the next slide.
So sorry.
Oh, you're fine. Lots of good things to write down. So this is actually just number 3. Couldn't remember if 4 was on this slide or not. My apologies. So we're going to take a look at number 3. Take a few moments. If you have any I noticed or I wonder statements to make around the text for this essential action, this would be the time to do it. Let's take a moment to look at it. Of course, if anyone wants to jump in with a hand, Kevin will be on the lookout for those.
Senator Lockman, your hand.
Thanks. Again, sort of looking at the intervention piece, I was wondering, and correct me if I'm misinterpreting this, but in 3F, when we talk about the intervention programs and services that are available It talks about inventorying them and identifying the gaps. I guess I was wondering if there was also anything I was missing about ensuring that that was fully communicated to students and families.
All right, that's an excellent point. Something we also talked about during this intervention programming. I think this particular slide, Senator Lockman, is kind of around internally sort of making those preparations and determining exactly what we have and what our capacity issues are as far as getting students engaged with those intervention programs. But you're right, a key element of that is going to be making sure we communicate and facilitate and also assist people along the way. So that's something that's going to have to come up. But
point.
Yep.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
And it actually comes up at the end of this section.
Okay.
So you should see it, a whole communication plan piece around that.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, and just as a note on the back of what Dr. Gant said, communication is definitely a big theme throughout all of this. It's something that's driven a lot of our conversation. So we've tried really hard to make sure that those communication protocols that have been mentioned prior to this are included in our essential actions. So great point, Senator Lockman. Kevin, do we have anybody else for number 3?
We do. Ms. Ingram, you had your hand up. You're off mute.
Thinking about when we're talking about the need to plan for our instruction, I'm wondering if we are also remembering that we have related arts teachers and educators who have not been mentioned. And I think it's under D where it says special education and general education, but I think we also are remiss if we don't add the fact that we have our related arts educators in there as well.
Ms. Ingram, are you speaking to 3D?
Yes, we talked about, it says inclusive practices to ensure that educators are partnering to plan and provide effective instruction.
Yes. So if we look at 3D, it talks about overarching structure and plan for the first unit of instruction for each grade level. So if it's a related arts teacher, they would be planning their first unit of instruction there. And then the sub-bullet for that would be the inclusive practices within their specific content area.
Thank you.
So do you think that we need to we didn't call anybody out by content area in this section. Are you suggesting that we call them out there, or?
They were lumped in under general education. But if you think there's a need for separation, we can note it and take a look at it for sure.
I do think we should note it. They might need different type of planning. And oftentimes, there are 1 or maybe 2 of them in the school at all. So they might need to plan together. If you wouldn't mind, please.
We'll make a note of that. All right, thank you. Good point. Kevin, anyone else?
Okay, we're going to go mobile with Dr. Burrows. You're off mute.
Yeah, great. Dr. Burrows.
So appreciate 3E. I think that we still need to consider, and I think I brought this up in earlier meetings, looking at the regulation for 1060 to 1032 and 188 and how we address those as we transition between those 3 plans.
Okay, did we get that audio as well, Dr. Burrows?
Can you hear me now? I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. You said regulation 1060, 1032.
Yeah, we need to look at that to see if we need to make adjustments to that and the 188 as we transition between the 3 plans and the impact of those as we transition.
Is that something that we would specifically, or just something we'd have to consider?
I think we should put it in our notes and figure out exactly where it belongs.
Yeah, that's a good point, Dr. Burrows. Yeah. We'll make a note of it and try to figure out where that belongs, because I think it's worth it's definitely worth looking at and figuring out.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a hand from Ms. Thomas.
Ms. Thomas.
So just piggybacking off of what Ms. Ingram said, just as we need to make sure that we're including our related arts teachers, we also have CTE teachers in our high schools. So we cannot teach an internship remotely, so kind of giving them more time to adapt to that as well, and just really highlighting that they're there and they're going to need extra modifications.
Sure.
Excellent point. We'll note that along with the grouping that CTE considerations need to be, thought about as we make any revisions. Thank you, Ms. Thomas.
There are no additional hands at this time.
Thank you, everyone, for what you've been offering up. Let's move to the next slide. We'll take a look at number 4 here. Let's take just a moment together to review. If you have a notice or wonder, you can go ahead and raise your hand in the column. Kevin will look out for those.
And then I'll move to 4.
Oh, we've got a couple hands came in. Ms. Schneider, I'm taking you off mute.
Yep, so this is all about, I'm just like primarily return to schools. So I'm just wondering about assessing kids new to schools and how we make sure that they're in the right kind of groups and getting what they need.
I think the way it's written under C for identifying screening processes and diagnostics would sort of include there, but it's not specifically stated for new and incoming students. Dr. Gant, do you have any thoughts on that?
My thought was that it would probably fall under C, the screening processes that you would have. B is really about reentry into school. So yeah, C would really be around the screening that you have. And when it says return to school, it's simply meaning that we have been in a remote situation and that we're all returning to school, not necessarily that they had been in your school prior. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but B doesn't sound like that to me. So yeah, so it definitely does, but I just feel like kind of incoming kindergartners and maybe even pre-K kids are kind of left out.
So we can certainly put in pre-K and kindergarten in B. The C though was the one that was really about the screening and diagnostics.
Agreed, but you were mentioning kindergarten. I'm sorry, B has K specifically in it.
Yes. And so Cricket, if we can capture pre-K and kindergarten in letter B as one of the groups that we might need to look at and include there.
And then do we, Laura, were you referring, I know some of our conversation last week was around the anticipation of a lot of movement for students, a lot of students moving around with their families because of the events that have taken place. I don't know if that's something we want to consider in C, Cricket. Just, to note that this process would apply to students that are new to schools, even if it's not in the pre-K or K area.
And I think we also have to hope that they registered, Ashley, because I don't know about you, but our registration is significantly down. We have to find these kids. Yeah.
Yeah, registration is definitely an emerging challenge for sure. So something to, at least in our region of Delaware, something to consider. Okay, thank you, Laura Schneider. Kevin?
We do not have any additional hands.
Okay, is there a 4D, Dr. Gant?
4D and a 4E. They couldn't fit all on the same slide.
Right, yeah, I thought there was. So let's go ahead and continue looking at 4. Raise hands if you have a notice or wonder around this essential action. So any notice or wonders around this 4D pertaining to special education or the overall plan around assessment?
Ms. Ingram, you're off mute.
Hello. For 4D, it has link to support document. When I printed my materials, the link wasn't there. I just wondered, is that going to be something that happens or has happened? Because I haven't checked since I printed my document on Monday.
It's in the works now. It's being developed. So there's going to be a document that will support this process. I just wanted to make sure that I noted it so that we left a space for it. Thank you.
Did we settle on hyperlinking this?
I'm not sure yet.
Okay, sounds good.
I'm not sure of it. And if it is hyperlinked, more than likely it will have the address directly to it versus just having a link to.
Yep. So, but there will be a link in some fashion. So rest assured that will be there eventually. All right. So let's move into 5 then. Certainly feel free, if there's something in 4D or E to also include your comments, but review 5. And if you'd like to raise a hand with notice or wonders around schools sustaining virtual structures for teacher teams, go ahead and do that now. Collaboration specifically.
Kevin, did Dr. Burrows raise his hand?
We do have a hand for Dr. Burrows. He's off mute.
Thank you. I'm just looking at 4D, and I like Stephanie, can't see the guidance. It's there. Just a concern that we have some schools that have students that have, over 150, close to 200 students that have IEPs, and the language there that, I don't disagree that we need to assess them as soon as they come back, but I hope there's understanding that this is going to take.
Yeah, Dr. Burrows, obviously that's a big challenge, is just the scheduling wise and the logistics around that, what that will look like as far as safety protocols and things of that nature, which is a little bit out of our hands in this group. But I think the essence of this more is about creating a plan and a system for getting through those IEPs and making sure that they've been updated accordingly. Obviously, the more a school has, the longer amount of time that's going to take. Dr. Gant, did you want to follow up on that?
No, you're spot on. I mean, this is really about thinking about, because this is the planning phase, the before school buildings open. This is really plans for and considerations for how we're going to go about this process. So
yeah, and that is a big
document should be coming shortly. I'm hoping to have it for next week, but that's coming shortly.
Thank you, Dr. Burrows.
Okay, we have a hand from Representative Williams. I've taken you off mute.
Um, 5A, B. My concern is, what about the students who go in between like districts? Sometimes in the city, some of those students will go from Christina to Red Clay to Colonial. So how are we going to engage and make sure that how are we going to get those students to be recognized if they weren't a part of the remote learning, but they switched schools? And how are we going to look at work submitted, analyzing students' work submitted if they're changing schools, districts, and also the homeless population?
It's a good point. Dr. Gant, did you want to say something around that?
Well, this is really about schools thinking about their structures, the structures that they have in place to be able to do that. So we need them to think about those students who did not engage during remote learning. We need them to think about how are they going to even address the work that was completed and what happens with that work. We need them to think about how they're going to share those data concerns. So these are really kind of thought processes, not necessarily this is how you should do it. And so they're written really to strengthen the plan that those schools are putting together, that remote learning team within that school is putting together.
Right,
but if the school team is putting together.
Right, but if you had a student, John, that went to a school in Christina and then left and now is in Red Clay, or they went from elementary to middle.
Yeah.
They're the kids that I'm really concerned about, that I don't want to lose them. And so how are we going to make sure that we identify who these children are and that the districts or charters or whoever they may be, we're all talking about these kids to make sure that we identify that they weren't part of the remote learning? How will a Red Clay school that's getting a Christina kid know that that student did not participate? It's probably not going to be on their records, or if it is, someone's probably not really going through the records thoroughly. So
Sure.
I'm really concerned about those kids, and we need to put something in here to address those kids.
So right now it's written as identifying students who did not engage in remote learning. So what suggestion would you make to provide that guidance for districts? How would you like to word
I'm
that?
not an educator, so but I would put it something in there that we really have to look at. Districts and charters are really going to look at the children who come in as a new student to be able to somehow, I don't know how you're going to do this, get in touch with a teacher or the other district and find out what's going on. I mean, I don't know. I don't have the answers. I'm just saying.
So Representative Williams, I think you bring up an excellent point. I think one of the things, that may be a good solution to this is, I think, and I can only speak for the Laurel School District, and it's not something that we can do to put out here and say, okay, all LEAs have to do this or all charters have to do this. But what we can say is that a best practice might be having your teams before school opens, and that's kind of what we're talking about right now, to really come up with grade level lists of students that we can ascertain, like, these students were not engaged in the online learning process. And then essentially when the transfer of records occurs, it's going to be, our responsibility to share, okay, Kim Williams is transferring from Colonial. She is on our list currently of students who was not engaged in the remote learning process, and just have that as a note during the transfer of records. And that's going to take some coordination within the district itself. So the principals and the grade level teams are going to have to come up with those lists. Then it's going to have to be forwarded to the guidance departments, the school counselors, and their departments, so that when transfer of records occur and things of that we can alert the incoming school district. It will not be a perfect system, at least not in the start. But I think if other districts set up protocols like that, which is not a ton of work, that could be very useful information for those students you're talking about. I think that would be a solution.
And I appreciate that, and I agree with you. I would just like it somehow to be displayed in this document that we are thinking about these students. We recognize this as an issue. I understand this is not going to be a perfect fix for everything, but I just want to show that we are really focusing in on that. And I know everyone here is. Thank you.
I think we can easily add a letter that says those specific students that are transferring from school to school. I think we can do that. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I don't have a lot to add. Thank you. I didn't put my hand on. I think you mostly covered it. I raised my hand to back up Representative Williams. It was an outstanding point. And it just kind of reminded me of some of the conversations we had prior about some of the coordination across districts. And that seemed like an area to highlight. And it also harkened, I think, back to what was just mentioned, that registration in general is an emerging issue. And those seem like related things that we need to make sure that we are highlighting a process to try to do that. And it sounds like that's been confirmed. So that's great.
Yeah, Senator Lockman, I think that just to reiterate your point, I think that it's a mindset issue mostly for the folks in each LEA or charter or private school. When they're getting new students, I think we sort of need to put our mindset in the place of, imagine this was a student coming from another state or country, right? Oftentimes, if we have a student coming in from Tennessee or a student coming in from, another country, Canada, Mexico, wherever, it doesn't matter. The point is that we'll look at that student differently when they come in and say, wow, we really need to find out what this student did and where they were in their educational journey. When students transfer around the state, that happens less, right? So I think it's a mindset that we need to set, and there's certainly something we could probably speak to in this document around that.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay, we have a hand from Ms. Thomas. I've taken you off mute.
I know I'm kind of backtracking, but to go back to 4D, I just want to ensure that the students with not an IEP but a 504 plan are also being recognized. So if we could just maybe add that in there too, that'd be great.
Great point. Thank you, Ms. Thomas.
Thank you.
Okay, there's a couple hands up. I'm just going to check to see if these are new hands. Ms. Schneider, is your hand up?
Yes. Just looking at 5E and F, I guess unless this seems like a really big ask of districts, unless we have info maybe from operations regarding any kind of adjustments to start dates, and knowing what minimal time we have with teachers before the school buildings open, seems to be a big ask. So I guess I think we would need to think about start dates like statewide, because those are really big things. Planning the effectiveness of digital tools and online programs, that is a ton of training that we have to give teachers in a short amount of time. So I just think it's a really big ask of districts without any adjustments being made from the state.
Sure. You know, the letter F, researching additional programming, was actually in a different spot in the document. So you bring up a good point that maybe that's not something that can be done prior to the start of school. So definitely F, we need to think about where that needs to go. E was more about an informal sharing of knowledge. Like if there were things within what we heard from surveys and from feedback is that there were a variety of different tools that were being used and programs that were being used within a school. And there was success with some and not success with others. And this is an opportunity. And what we heard from parents is if they had children at different grade levels, they were using different tools and different platforms. And so this was really to speak to that building coming together and saying, this is what really worked for our community. This is what didn't work for our community. So when we talk about effectiveness and use, that's really what E was about. F is more about researching. And so, so I'm interested to find out if E still seems like a big lift when you're having a conversation with school about the programs that were used.
Maybe not so much a conversation, but even just the title of 5, right? Supporting schools to sustain virtual structures for teacher teams. Because obviously the support also is like some kind of PD. We have to prepare these teachers who were thrown into like a ocean with sharks, right? And we did what we could, right? But it was a lot of Band-Aids. And I think we owe it to the teachers and the students to better prepare them. And again, districts are provided a very slim runway to make that happen. We only get a couple days with teachers, right? And then there's all that other mandatory trainings that the state has that we have to get done in order to start the year as well. So sometimes it leaves maybe one day for building leaders to get anything done. So I think we need to be just real thoughtful about that and what we're expecting without adjusting the calendar.
Thank you.
There are no additional hands.
All right, let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. All right, so the last one here for minimal spread before school opens, number 6. Let's take just a moment to review it. If you have I notice or an I wonder statement around these essential actions, go ahead and put your hand up in the participants column.
I do want to highlight something that Ms. Ingram shared, not Ms. Ingram, Ms. Greg shared at the beginning. SEL, the acronym, we want to make sure we spell that out for social emotional learning. So for those that weren't sure what that was, that's what that is. And so Cricket, if you can make a note that we spell that out in letter A.
Dr. Gann as well. Dr. Burrows has entered something into the chat, which I think we definitely want to get on the record here for our live stream. He was saying that possibly creating or having districts develop a new student screening process around incoming students to assure, sort of where they've been and what they've been doing. And he put that in there. I just wanted to make sure that it was on public record and a part of our notes.
Yeah, and that might be the letter, the extra letter that we want to add in there. That's great language. So thank you.
It's a good idea. Thank you, Dr. Burrows. All right, Kevin, do we have any hands around 6 for professional learning and participation in PLCs?
We do. Ms. Ingram, just raise your hand. I've taken you off mute.
Thanks. I just need to, not to beat a dead horse, but Ms. Schneider just brought up a wonderful point that I had just finished scribbling on my own paper. I'm very concerned about the amount of work being required for our educators at the beginning of the year, and rightfully so. All of these things need to take place. But like Ms. Snyder said, we have a limited number of days, many of which are already normally filled for our educators with PD, PLCs, meetings, and trainings. I'm just concerned we need to be adequately giving teachers time to prepare for instruction and the SCL we just talked about and all the other needs going back to school. I know as an elementary educator, you're always concerned about what your room looks like. There's just not enough time. And I do think we need to really think about when school is going to open, making sure we count back and have the educators be given enough time to adequately prepare for what's coming their way.
Thank you.
All right.
Schneider, was your hand up on 6?
Nope, sorry, still up from last time.
Okay, I don't have any additional hands at this time.
All right, then we will move to our next scenario and make haste here.
We're actually still in the same one.
Oh yes, we'll move, not from our next scenario, but we'll move to 7, 8, and 9. Sorry, I thought we were on to the next one. My apologies. So
the first one is there are a lot of them because it's front loading everything that needs to happen in the event that we have to transition. So the reason that this one is so bulky is because it's to prepare for, someone mentioned it earlier, so that I think maybe Ms. Schneider, so that we're better prepared if we have to transition. So that's what this one's about.
A lot of the pre-work that needs to go into this. Okay, so let's take a look here. We have 7, 8, and 9 for our minimal spread. We are still in minimal spread for the record. Before school opens, the front-loading process, as Dr. Gant was outlining, we will take hands on any of these items for I notice and I wonder about our essential actions that we've compiled here from our conversations. Take a minute.
All right, we have a hand from Representative Williams. I've taken you off mute.
Thank you. So am I reading this correctly? So before school actually opens, the school must identify students and families that don't have access to the internet?
I'm sorry, you were cutting out, or you meant me.
I'm looking at, so is this before school actually goes back into session?
Yes, this is the process of before school buildings open. Yes.
Who's going to figure out which students and families don't have supplies or that have internet issues?
So something we had talked about and something that is currently happening is surveys that are going out. Some districts are doing them on their own, or schools or charters, but also the state Department of Education has had surveys going out. So there's a lot of data coming into schools currently about that. But it is our recommendation that, schools be engaged in that process prior to the school year opening.
So I'm just going to go back to my original point. The kids that are shuffling between school districts, schools, homeless, they're the ones that aren't going to have these things. And I'm not really sure how we're going to identify them.
Well, I don't think that, yeah, you're right, 100%. I don't think this process is stasis. I think that we start a system for doing this, going back to Dr. Burrow's point, maybe a new screening process that includes, what are your access, to technology? What is your ability to engage in this particular manner? I think those things are going to have to be part of our, process when we welcome students into our buildings that weren't with us before. Because you're right, despite all of our best efforts right now and being proactive, there'll be students that show up on the first day that weren't engaged in those processes, and we'll need to be ready for that. So it's an excellent point, and one that is not lost on the committee for sure. Dr. Gant.
And if I could just, because I think what threw me off was before school buildings open.
Right. Well, before school buildings open to students is what we mean. But even after the school buildings open, some of these systems and processes will have to overlap and continue on. Am I accurate in saying that, Dr. Gant?
Yes, this is really about the planning process. This is not really as much about the identifying the students at this point. This is really the team planning. How will they determine access and materials? So are they going to include it in their new screening process? How are they going to make decisions around attendance if they have to shift to remote learning? How will they deal with grades and credits? This is so that they can do it on the front end versus waiting until we're in it to then react to it. So this is really number 8 is about being proactive and planning more than it is identifying. So that's why it says make sure plans are in place versus to monitor and assess versus identifying students who have.
Right, and I appreciate that. I'm just, again, I think I'm listening to the educators on this conference call. I'm a little nervous that we're asking schools, districts, charters to do a lot of stuff that, and I think it needs to be done. I'm just not sure how they're going to be able to do all this. And is there like some discussion with the Department of Ed in the requirements of what we expect from our educators when they first return to school, as far as I know the first week they're supposed to be putting their classrooms back together, but they do a lot of professional development. Is there talk about maybe moving some of the professional development to another time or lessening it so they can focus on these important issues?
So each LEA determines what types of work that they're going to do prior to school starting, their professional learning, how they lay that out. And so this again is about the planning of that process more so than it is telling them this is what they have to have in place. To be honest with you, as we're talking to the curriculum directors and we're talking to district folks, they're already involved and engaged in these conversations. They're already involved and engaged in this planning. So I do want us to be careful that we're not thinking that the teacher is responsible for developing the plans for this, that there are district level folks that are already in these conversations that are meeting regularly, reviewing those survey results, looking at what the feedback is from their families, and then making adjustments and developing their return to school plan. So this is already in the works. We're just actually identifying some best practices that are out there. Thank you.
Kevin, do we have any other
hand from Ms. Thomas? You're off mute.
So 8D, I was wondering if we could take out the in case of return to remote learning, because that support is going to be needed no matter what the situation is. Even though that support has been there in the past, I think that that's kind of going to be overshadowed with how we're going to be pushing so much curriculum and so much learning. So I just think that we need to really ensure that our students are getting that support. And in a previous slide, it said something about like transcript counseling, which I'm all for, making sure that our high school students are getting the credits that we need. But it could be a lot easier if we just lumped these two things into one bullet point. Saying like, wow, we're doing like, okay, here's all of your credits. These are your classes. While we're doing this, let's also like, what's your college plans? Let's look at college application week.
Sure.
I think two things, Caitlin. This is a great point. I think in 8D, to address the first thing you said, I think the reason that it's quantified with in case of a return to remote learning is just to place that in context of this plan as a reaction to the public health crisis. But I agree with the importance of it. It has to be there and has to be supported regardless we're in this scenario or not. So you bring up a good point, but I think the reason it was written in that nature is because of the context of the particular recommendation. But to your next point, but to your next point, I think maybe what I hear you saying is that, taking the idea of transition as well as transcript counseling and maybe just coming up with either something that stands on its own or a sub item that deals specifically with working with our students as they transition from secondary to post-secondary and career. I think that would be important. So did I kind of encapsulate what you were thinking?
Yeah, that was perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Thomas.
Ms. Vitale, you're off mute.
Thank you. So for 8A about access and materials, again, like this was a huge thing that we talked about, the need to identify, but I think even just beyond identify, like to start brainstorming how we're going to get the resources and supplies is really critical, because I think what it was a lot of teachers scrambling and trying to mail and do lots of different things to get information to teachers, but it to children, but it's going to be a lot. Brainstorming needs to happen early on.
Yeah, I think Ms. Vitale, I think that like Dr. Gant keeps reminding us that this is very much there to inform the planning process for our districts. So maybe we need to be more explicit about that in that particular area, though, because it's the hope right now that LEAs and charters and private schools across the state of Delaware are planning toward making sure we have the access and materials that we need for students to have these things when we return to school, whenever that is here in the upcoming weeks and months. So perhaps it needs to maybe be more explicitly stated, but I hear what you're saying for sure. Dr. Gant?
Is there a better verb, Rebecca, other than identify? Because the overarching statement is make sure plans are in place to monitor and assess, right? But if you don't think that identify is the right verb, is there a better verb to put there?
Yeah, no, and I get what is being stated in the thing. I think you do need to identify, but it's about accessibility. I think it's about how are we getting, like, we can just identify, but how are we getting the information out?
Maybe
So I don't know.
engage with would be the right term. Engage with students and families without connectivity and or who need access to devices, materials, to imply an action, right? One, not only can we identify who it is, but we need to have a process to interact with them in this planning process time to help them be ready to go when the school year starts, perhaps. Just spitballing.
Yeah, I think that might be a better word. I'm trying to think too.
Okay. If you think of something, just shoot it to us.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a hand up from Senator Lockman.
Yes, before I start, I wanted to say I really like that engage idea. I think it is much more active than, you sort of identify and you have a list sitting there somewhere gathering dust. I think sometimes that's what that feels like. So anyway, I like that. But my actual comment was about 9, if it's okay to go to 9.
Absolutely.
It's a wordsmithing thing that I thought might be necessary. So it says just in the opening sentence to communicate in whichever mode necessary. I was thinking, from an outreach perspective, maybe all modes necessary might be a little bit better. I feel like that might be a little bit limiting. It's like you could pick one, but we know that you've got to get multiple to get more people. So I thought maybe making that a little bit more explicit, all modes necessary. And I thought, although I know this is the last one on the before schools, it kind of struck me that, there was an opportunity here to return back to some of the things that we've mentioned, such as making sure that the interventions are communicated, maybe making that clear in the language that that's one of the items that we're letting folks know about. And that it also seems like having that robust plan to do that outreach might help inform that capacity question that we started out with at the very top. So I guess the way to connect those and make sure that this is truly robust and that there's also the capacity to deliver that robust plan. I would love to see that reflected in some way.
So Senator Lockman, when you see 9, 4, 1, 2, and 3, are you suggesting that we add a 4, a 5, and maybe include some additional pieces there?
Well, I mean, I think in bullet 4, where it talks about available supports for families, I just noticed that the interventions weren't specifically there. So maybe if that we mentioned earlier.
Okay.
And talked about communicating those. So, I mean, maybe that's implied in one of these other terms, but if not, ensuring that. And then I was just, I don't know if there's a way to hearken to this bullet in the earlier bullet or something just in terms of if we are going to add language in that earlier point to say it's not just about identifying non-instructional staff to do that, it's maybe ensuring adequate capacity to do that outreach. And maybe this gives us a little bit of a sense of what that outreach is that needs to be accomplished.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Lockman. Kevin, anybody else?
Ms. Schneider, did you have your hand up?
I did this time. Yep. So I was thinking about something that Representative Williams said regarding making time for the training. And again, this is like before the school buildings opened. So although some trainings might not be required at the beginning of the year, the schools have to provide time for teachers to get them done. So traditionally, a lot of districts use the beginning of the year to get a lot of these mandatory state trainings. And I can think of 4 or 5 off the top of my head that teachers have to do. So I'm wondering, and I know this is the intersection of operations and academics, right? But if the state might even consider pressing pause on these mandatory trainings that take hours and hours of time because we have extenuating circumstances this school year.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you for that point.
Yeah. We'll certainly check into it. I can't speak to it at this point, but we can certainly check into it.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I imagine it's tough. I'll let Dr. Gant, do what she can do, but the content around those is obviously very sensitive as well. So it's a tough thing to balance, but it certainly does take up a lot of time. So it's a point well made.
Agree, but we can't do it all.
Can't do it all. I know.
Taking something off.
Sure.
Yeah. All right.
Ms. Thomas, was your hand up?
No, it was not. Sorry.
All right, there are no additional, oh, my apologies. Senator Lockman, you put your hand back up?
Yes.
Take you off mute.
I just had a quick clarifying question. It may be a silly question, but do the before school reopens apply to all spread scenarios?
So this one is for minimal.
Okay.
Because the thought is that we're preparing for the others. So
Okay.
that's why this one is so hefty.
Right.
So that you're prepared to transition on a moment's notice without having to try to figure it out when you're in it.
Okay. So
There's a bit of a cascading effect here. So, yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
All right. Hey, minimal spread when school buildings are open. So we are moving right along in our first scenario of minimal spread. When school buildings open, let's jump into 1, 2, and 3 as we see here. Just take a second if you would like to offer an I notice or an I wonder statement around these essential actions, raise your hand.
Okay, we have a hand up from Senator Lockman.
Oh, no, that was the old one.
Sorry, okay. No worries. I have a hand from Ms. Ingram.
I noticed that we have, and this is the second time I've noticed it. So if you look at 1A, it's talking about strategies to accelerate student learning. And I think the other one in the beginning spoke to the same. Are we also going to add providing for remediation if necessary?
Go ahead, Dr. Gant.
Nope, you go on.
Well, I think one of the things that's been a focus of us is that knowing that what we don't want to see happen is that when all students begin this year, we go back and sort of reteach what we missed last year. We know that exposure to grade level content is what's going to be the most important thing to keep students moving and growing forward. So I think the term accelerate, it's designed at least to sort of encompass both of those things together. For example, we don't want to ignore what students have missed along the way, but we also don't want to go on a big detour and then get further behind on the current grade level, especially considering the amount of time of year that was missed. So I think that was an intentional choice to focus on the word accelerate as opposed to remediation for that reason. But I don't think it was intended to ignore the idea that there will be remediation work that needs to happen with students. We have to be careful around how this guidance is phrased because we don't want people to get the wrong idea about what the right thing to do is. So I think that's my explanation for it. I don't know if that helps or if it gets through what we're trying to accomplish, but that's what it is.
And it also speaks directly to our definition of instruction around unfinished learning, around how we use assessments to diagnose, to prioritize prerequisite knowledge that's needed to move forward. And so we have been very intentional. That's why we spent the first 3 weeks just really kind of digging into that because all of the research is telling us that spending time just to remediate will only widen the gap. And so it's really an intentional work around accelerating to make sure that we capture the information that students need to be able to access grade level instruction.
It has been noted though. So it's something we'll continue to look at as we move through this, but that was the explanation around that.
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Ingram.
No additional hands at this time.
Okay. right, so if we take a look at our minimal spread number 4 through 7 now, we'll notice that, or we'll have an opportunity now to do the I notice, I wonder protocol. If anybody has a notice or wonder around 4 through 7, please feel free to raise your hand. We'll get it on the record and keep moving forward in this process. Looking forward to it. Let's see.
Ms. Ingram, was your hand up regarding 4 through 7?
No, I forgot to take it down. I apologize.
No worries.
So are we ready for the next scenario?
I think we are. Kevin, no hands, right?
No hands.
Okay, good, everybody. We'll keep moving forward in this process. Let's take a look at essential actions review now. We're going to go into the minimal to moderate spread. This is if we are what we commonly refer to as hybrid in our classroom scenarios. What hybrid will exactly look like, we may not know, but these are our essential or actions around a hybrid scenario. All right, so we're going to take a look now for hybrid 1 through 4. And again, if you have any I notice or I wonder statements around these particular essential actions, go ahead and raise your hand, and Kevin will be on the lookout for those.
Okay, we have a hand from Ms. Castellanos.
Castellanos.
Yes, I just didn't know if 6 was needed since it was in the preparing before school started. So before the school started, it says would determine a plan for schedule shifts if, schools are closed or have to pivot to remote learning. So I didn't know if it just needed to be taken out here.
Which one is that? Number 6?
Number 6, yes.
Okay, we're on. That will be on the next slide, but it's a great point.
Sorry.
No, you're fine. Hold on to that. We will revisit it in just a moment, but I want to make sure if anybody else has a 1 through 4 I notice or I wonder. Kevin?
Senator Lockman, your hand is up.
Yeah, I'm just going to repeat my prior comment. I guess obviously I think it would match if we make the adjustment in the pre-planning that it's all modes as opposed to something looser like whatever or whichever.
I think that's a valid point. I think communication tends to be a lot more three-dimensional these days, so it's a good thing to note, for sure.
And that's number 2, correct?
That is 2. Yeah, the
number 2.
Yeah, 2, whatever. Yeah, so we'll just have to line those up. Okay, let's move on to the next slide, and we'll come back to Ms. Castellanos. And she was saying that number 6 was redundant, I guess is what we were saying. It was already outlined before, or what was the catch?
Yes, number 6, I think, is covered in before school starts. What we reviewed already, number 7 in the first set of recommendations, it said determine a plan for schedule shifts. So I didn't think it needed to be repeated here. I would just take it out.
Yeah, I see that. Dr. Gant, do we have a reason for specifically leaving this here or no?
No, I think the verb was supposed to change to like implement plan or activate plan. I don't think that it's supposed to be determined.
Okay. Yeah, I remember we had talked about this, but I couldn't remember under which scenario our conversation was around. Good. That's
great. I think the same thing for number 7. It should have been like an activate or a implement. A verb at the beginning.
Great point, Ms. Castellanos. Thanks for catching us on that and making sure we get the right verbs and intentions out of these statements. Do we have any others for 5, 6, or 7?
I guess my question is, can we take it out completely? I mean, if we do it before school opens, then, I was trying to find a way that we could reduce this document in some ways and where it was repetitive. So if we determine a plan before, at any point during the year, we have to switch between modes, we've got our plan, I don't know that we need to say then implement that plan. I feel like if you have a plan before school starts, then whatever you're going to need it, you're going to have to input. I just would take it out.
Yeah, I think you make a good point about brevity. I also think, I think the intention is to have some parallels between these scenarios. So parallelism was the intention. So I think we just have to look at that point that you've made, Ms. Castellanos, and determine, is it better just to omit it, or is it better to keep the parallelism with the different verbs? But it's a good point.
And 7 also is a repetition, like you said, of the previous document about, the plans and having everything. So I would take it out if you're making that plan ahead of time, or like you said, if you're actually changing what you want people to do in this scenario. I mean, I just wouldn't repeat the same thing again in each section. So
It's an excellent note, and we have it down. Thank you, Ms. Castellanos.
thank you.
Okay, we have a few more hands. And next we're going to go to Ms. Vitelli. You're off mute.
Yeah, thank you. So this, again, it's like slightly backtracking, but something in here kind of made me think, oh, well, that might be something we want to really emphasize in before schools open, just the communication with families. I think this is a lot of information. So I just think being mindful of like schools need to prepare families with all 3 scenarios or all options that are going to happen like ahead of time. And again, to mention how that's going to look. Like, I think there needs to be a lot of planning and how we're going to roll that out to families and make sure they understand, because it is a lot of information. So again, I don't know if that's something to maybe consider adding into the first part with like the planning stage of before it opens, but something that caught my mind.
Yep, I just went back to the memo spread when buildings were open, as well as number 9, before schools are open. So that's where the development of the communications plan happens. And then in minimal spread, we're ensuring that communication plan is happening on a regular basis. And so in hybrid, you'll find, I'm sorry, clicking too much here. You'll find it in number 2, activate the robust communication plan. So that communication plan is present in all scenarios.
Okay.
We can't over communicate.
Yeah, I'm wondering, it's not even just like our way to reach everyone, but that they understand what it looks like. I don't, maybe I'm trying to think about like if that's clear that that we're communicating, ahead of time, like this is the expectation or this is the reality of what may happen, so that there's abundant time to plan or to thinking about the planning for homes and everything like that.
Sure. So when you look at 2A around expectations for blended instruction, if you think of other language that you think should be added or maybe modified, just let us know.
Okay.
Because that was the goal, was to make sure that we were over communicating.
Yes. All right, Ms. Vitelli, do we have another hand up? We are actually on 5 through 7.
We have 2 hands. Dr. Lawson, you're off mute.
Thank you. So I do notice, and I think maybe this was part of the reason why Allison was struggling is, a lot of the wording is the same. And I'm struggling because the hybrid is so much more difficult to figure out. So I wonder if we aren't going to get any more specific in terms of, who's coming to school and who's staying home and how is attendance taken. And yes, staffing should be considered, and it in my head, it's very difficult to think about how we will staff people in a building at the same time we're staffing people to do remote and have enough staffing to be able to do everything social distancing wise. So I think the struggle that what I'm noticing is the vagueness, and I understand it has to be to some extent flexible for LEAs, but we also like to have consistency across the state and especially in our county districts, just for purposes of families understanding and having conversations and those kinds of things. So,
sure. So one of the things that makes hybrid so difficult is that it's completely driven by public health. So once public health gives us what the parameters are, then we can respond to that. That's what makes this one the toughest. If we're out, it's closed, then we're closed. If we're in, then we're given that guidance and we're moving forward. But the hybrid one is the one that's the trickiest. And so we try to leave it in a way that that based on what that public health guidance is, we can be responsive to it. So number 6 and 7 I'm sorry, number 6 and number 7 do have the wrong verbs. So I do want to reiterate that we do need to change that or eliminate 6 once we have that conversation. But to your point, that's part of the struggle around hybrid.
Yeah, and in some manner, Dr. Lawson, what we're developing here around the academics and equity piece is it has to be flexible enough to sort of respond to what recommendations that will come out of the other 2 task force around, for example, hybrids. So there's just so much that we don't know exactly what that's going to congeal in, but in the next week or 2, we should have at least a better idea around what the recommendations are if we are in that scenario, logistically speaking, staff speaking. And then, some of these may come into a better focus, but I agree. It's a little hard to sit in a hybrid scenario until we have an idea of what that might look like exactly. And
I hear you, but I think they're going to be looking to us because we're academics and equity to determine who should be in school, right, and who shouldn't. That kind of a thing. And I don't know. I agree with you. It's just the thinking that we're going to have to turn on a dime. And I don't know how you can make plans for all the scenarios that might happen. Is it one building that's shut down? Or, is it, so it's just very difficult to think through, I guess. And I thought, that we might get into a little bit more specifics, but I would imagine those other groups would be looking to us around some of these and even the attendance piece. So how are we, marking attendance if we are hybrid, if some are remote and others are present, what does that look like? So just looking for, I guess, a little bit more in-depth kind of discussions around those pieces.
Okay.
Okay, we have one additional hand from Dr. Alonso. You're off mute.
Thank you. So I'm appreciative that in terms of 7A, the identifying of students and families without connectivity or access, I keep thinking of the population of students, though, that hasn't been mentioned. I thought it might be mentioned in the hybrid. We had families who were homeless. We have families whose parents are not literate. We have families who have adult supervision, but not really capable of being conducive to overseeing the children in the learning. And so I just worry because in some schools, that's a large portion of the population. And I don't see any naming of it, or maybe I've missed it, but I don't see it. And I just wanted to say it's a notice.
And that is something, it's something that's come up tonight as well. And we will continue to try to build those ideas in. We certainly need to recognize that is a real challenge for many families and in many schools. Thank you, Dr. Alonso.
We had a hand come in from Representative Williams. I'm taking you off mute.
Yes, I just want to comment that I have been bringing this up all night. So that we need to recognize the homeless population, the children who are going from school to school or district to district, or the ELO students. So I think we keep talking about it. I think we need to put more of a focus on them in this document.
And Representative Williams, that's what that's what tonight's process is about. It's about us compiling these notices and wonders. And when we return back to these essential actions, if there are some things that stand out and this certainly is something that's come up quite a lot, we can make our adjustments to it. And you're not wrong. It is something that is definitely going to be challenging for schools and families across the state and country. So it is well noted this evening. Thank you very much for bringing it up.
Yes, the last speaker, I just wanted to make sure that she was aware that, I don't know if she was on when we were speaking about it, but I just want to know that others have agreed and have also stated this, and we agree with her. Thank you.
It has come up tonight, Dr. Alonso, and we will continue to look at it. And I appreciate you pointing it back out.
Thank you.
I'm not seeing any additional hands.
School buildings reopen under the minimal to moderate spread scenario. We've got 1 to 3. Dr. Gant, I will note that time has grown short as always. Is there any alterations to our schedule that we'd like to make?
So what I will say, just to help the group acclimate to the rest of the document, because there really are 2 sections left. This section of when school buildings reopen after hybrid is the same as the opening, the opening section. So whatever changes we make from the first opening, we certainly would make here. And then there's the significant close. So really, if we're able to work our way through notices and wonders of the significant close, then we'll really be in a good place.
Perhaps we can open it up that if there's anything in this section, because we'd like to jump to the significant spread scenario. If there's anything in this section that stands out, and again, like Dr. Gant said, we're changing the same section in the previous scenario, so likely those will all transfer to this. But if you think of something, you can send those along in the parking lot, and we'll address them throughout the week, as we've done in the previous weeks. Do we want to go ahead and jump to the next scenario? And this is the significant spread scenario. Here's 1 through 4. While our buildings are closed, let's take a few seconds. And if you want to offer an I notice or wonder around this, you could raise your hand. Kevin, we have somebody coming up already here.
Was your hand up regarding this slide?
No.
Previous comment. Okay, thank you. It's okay, Dr. Alonso. Thank you.
Mr. Gisk, would you like me to move to the next slide?
Yes, let's go ahead and move to the next slide. 5 through 7, same protocol. Again, you see the parallelism that we have built throughout this. I see Caitlin shaking her head. We talked about that before. It's a good point. That's kind of one of the things that we were trying to do, but there is something. Now will be the time to raise your hand. This deals with a full remote scenario. I think certainly the idea around building these essential actions was that, if we're heading in, under a minimal spread, what are the, in the new dynamic, what are the things we need to do to plan so that we can be agile as an organization and shift back and forth to meet the needs of both public health and students academically with equity in mind. And I think that's why the bulk of our conversation took place in that first scenario, because the planning part of this is going to be very, very significant. Does anybody have a hand up for the remote scenario under significant spread, Kevin?
No, not at this time.
Okay. Again, I will say, because we're getting close to time, and I know Dr. Gant has a few things to go through as we end the night, but I will say that, we do have a parking lot protocol. We certainly know how important this is. So if you have some time, you want to review the things that we finished up the evening with, although we had to be a little bit accelerated here. Please make sure you reach out and send those comments into the parking lot, and we will continue to think about them as these essential actions translate into our final recommendations. Dr. Gant?
Sure. And I am really appreciative of all the pre-work that you did to prepare for this meeting. This was a heavy lift and a lot of reading and a lot to go through. And so I'm really, really appreciative of that. Just to talk a little bit about our next steps. Next week is our final meeting. So please be prepared for next week's discussion by reading the final recommendations draft, which will serve as this committee's recommendations to the Secretary of Education. Our goal is to forward the draft to you by email and post online. And so last week, we said we would get it to you by Monday, and we got it to you by Friday. I was so excited about that. We're going to shoot for Friday again. It depends on how quickly Cricket can make the changes that we've discussed tonight. But based on the changes and the conversations that we've had this evening, we're going to try to get you a clean copy to review the whole thing. So you'll have an opportunity to not only look at the changes that were made based on tonight's feedback, but you'll have an opportunity to see it in relationship to the entire document. So the the feedback around from the Health and Wellness Working Group as well as the Operations and Services Working Group. We'll see all of their work all in one package. So it will be a big lift, but really, if you can hone in on the conversation that we had tonight, kind of the thinking that you've had as you've listened to each other, because other things may have come up as you talked tonight and listened to each other, that's where we really, really, really want to capture that feedback for next week. So the way that next week will look is we will review that final document. And at that point, we'll be ready to forward those recommendations. So please note the draft document will capture the feedback received this evening, written in the 3 public health scenarios, and informed by our definitions of equity, assessment, and instruction, accelerated student learning, and grade level curriculum using prioritized assessment that directly informs instruction. We would also like to thank our viewing audience for joining us. Please remember, if you'd like to share your ideas, send your feedback to reopeningideas@doe.k12.de.us or leave a voicemail at 302-735-4244. Thank you very much. Thank you for all of your engagement and your hard work. Have a great evening. Our meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks as always. See you next week.
Thank you all. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.